Fourth City of Fredericksburg Planning Commission meeting to order. Would you please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I'm going to kind of interject here, number 2A on our agenda. I understand we need to elect officers for next year, or actually starting as of next meeting, by this meeting, our last meeting in October. I'd like to put that in after number 6 to the agenda, if that's okay with everyone, for discussion. All right. Let's move on to number 3, approval of minutes. We have two sets of meeting minutes. The first is our September 26, 2018 regular meeting minutes. Any comments or additions, changes?
For the regular meeting, right?
Regular meeting, yes, sir.
Move to accept.
Second.
Any further comment? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. I think that was 6-0. Next meeting minutes were from our October 10th work session, which was our meeting with Street Sense. So relatively brief set of meeting minutes there.
As I recall, Mr. Page came in late. Should it say he came in late or absent?
That's right. I also have a comment about these minutes. I would ask that we delay approving these minutes because there are no minutes. When we have work sessions, they need to be presented in such a fashion as for regular meetings that the minutes give some indication of the subjects that were discussed and any actions taken. And in the past, this issue has come up, and the city attorney, I know, has expressed the opinion that work session minutes need to give some reasonable identification of what was discussed. I, for instance, was not at most of this meeting. This doesn't give me any idea what was actually discussed. And I think that somebody should go back and give some sort of indication of a page or two of what was discussed. So I would ask that this be postponed to the next meeting.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree with you, Mr. Pates. I do think that we could summarize the general discussions on this. I think the format of it was in two small working groups, a little difficult to capture everything, but I think a general summation of the topics discussed would probably be something that would be doable. Would you agree, Mr. Johnson, that we could maybe do that? Okay. Any other
No,
thoughts on
I
that?
agree, because there were like 10 different subsets or whatever, and we told what we thought and whatever. I think we should at least identify those things that we talked about.
Yeah, in general terms. Okay.
One alibi, Mr. Chairman. So on the September 26 minutes, you said 6-0, but I was absent, so I think that's 5-0.
Sorry, 5-0. Correct that. Thank you. Okay, so are we, we'll defer voting on this until our next meeting, hopefully. Next item of business is declaration of conflict of interest. This is the point during the meeting, if any council, planning commission member or member of staff have a personal conflict of interest on any items being discussed, please state that you do and the reasons why. Does anyone have a conflict of interest to declare? Seeing none, let's move on to the continuation of our public hearing, the Area 6 Small Area Plan. Is this going to you, Mike, or you, Susanna? Okay, recognize you. Susanna, please. Susanna Finn, thank you.
Grab that computer real quick, please. So I won't spend a lot of time. I think we've talked about many of the details of the plan, but I just wanted to update about a few of the things that were changes since our last meeting in September. So in the amendments that you all received in your packets, there were a few items that were highlighted in red, and those are the things that have been added since you had a last chance to review the document. Then the first one is school parking, and that was something that we heard directly from the neighborhood association as being an issue for them. So just setting as sort of a general vision policy that we should encourage the civic use to function well with its residential neighborhoods, especially as it comes to, in terms of parking. The second one, just to make sure that we were ensuring consistency, and something that we talked about a lot, was that the T4M, like its sort of T4 cousin, will allow single-family detached homes. So we've amended that sort of matrix to make sure that that's noted. It was always part of the vision that that was part of it. We just wanted to make sure that we updated that graphic to show it as well. And then in the historic resources section, we added the 2 additional buildings, the Economy Food Mart and the former Pratt Medical Clinic, which were recommended to us by the ARB as being added as worthy of note for the area. So we added those in as well.
Does that mean they would be contributing structures or not?
So they wouldn't be part of the Maker District. They are outside of that boundary, but they wanted to recognize them as being of a similar character and nature and from the same kind of period of significance as part of that kind of Fall Hill medical corridor. So we just felt that it was appropriate to recognize them because the ARB had recognized them as being worthy of inventory of the local inventory of historic structures. So we wanted to make sure that we noted that in the plan. And then I just wanted to thank you all for taking the time to meet with us over the past week to take the tours of the small area. I think it was really beneficial for all of us to be able to see, what these things really look like on the ground. We sat a good amount of time in the shopping centers to talk about what T5C redevelopment there may look like, as well as talk about along the Maker District corridors of Fall Hill Avenue and Princess Anne Street, what structures really define the corridor and recognize those, and kind of theorize about what the evolution of that corridor may look like. And then we had a lot of very good discussion about residential neighborhoods and how do we properly transition to them and protect them at all costs. So I think it was really useful. I also brought, just to refresh everyone's memory, some of the things that we talked about on the tour as well regarding mobility, which is the Fall Hill Avenue, Washington Ave, one-way pair, two-way pair conversion for traffic calming and neighborhood protection reasons. And then I just wanted to show as well the full illustrations of what we talked about at the 2 intersections of Route 1 and Fall Hill and Route 1 and Princess Anne Street, because, a little bit difficult to visualize when you're there at that busy intersection. But so we talked about really what we're focusing on there is just increased capacity to improve the flow of what is really a larger regional traffic issue. But so that's the Fall Hill Avenue intersection, and then we have the Princess Anne Street intersection too. So we can look at those. So as far as the comp plan is concerned with those, it's calling for an implementation of the VDOT STARS recommendations, which includes this as well as a few other elements. But just wanted to make sure we could see them as well, if there were specific questions about it. Otherwise, we're just ready to discuss.
Can you go back to the prior slide? Has there been any discussion about closing the connection of Bridgewater to Fall Hill?
Bridgewater and Fall Hill. I don't think so as part of STARS, no. No.
It's awfully close to Route 1. It creates a lot of issues right there at that intersection with cars trying to turn left. I was just curious if anybody had discussed that at all or trying to reroute it some way. Okay. I've got a number of comments, but any other?
Go ahead.
Okay. Let's start you, Mr. Beavers.
I'll probably take less time than you will, Jim, so, I know you went right to the business about the parking around the high school, and I don't disagree with the concept, but I don't like these words, the school board should make student parking at James Monroe High School free. I don't think that's the solution. I don't think one unit of government should be telling another unit of government what they should do. I'd much rather see words like the school board should find solutions, alternatives, or whatever, rather than us kind of mandating that they make it free, and that might not solve the problem anyway. So that's all I have to say about that.
I think that would be an easy enough change to make that still sort of addresses the neighborhood's concern and talks about the fact that a solution needs to be made without necessarily dictating their course of
Okay,
action.
fine, thank
We
you.
can make that change.
Yeah, I agree with you. I wasn't crazy about that addition, the way it was worded.
I agree.
You do?
Yeah, I agree.
Wow.
I had a question about your 2 new properties that are being added to the list. Now, did you say all of the other properties that were already listed are in the Maker District?
Yes.
Okay. And the significance of that is that they would potentially be involved in the TDR program.
Yes.
So what's the point of adding these if they're not eligible for TDR?
The ARB just wanted to recognize them as being of a similar period of significance, having a similar pattern, and just wanted to recognize them as another item of note for the neighborhood, just for consideration. We in the plan include other historic resources in the area that aren't necessarily TDR, properties, but just our historic resources that serve a good reference point and serve as a way to define the character of the neighborhoods, that aren't necessarily part
Well,
of
then
a
maybe they
larger
should be listed
strategy.
as part of the historic resources and not with that other list.
That's where we've got them listed.
Gotcha, okay, that's
Yeah.
fine,
Yeah,
thank you,
in that gray and white chart, that's where we've got them listed
good,
currently.
okay.
Yeah.
Suzanne, I had a couple of questions that, I don't know if they're super specific, but
Right.
I just wanted to ask, on page 123 of the comprehensive plan, where you're describing the different residential or the different building types, I am really confused when it comes to semi-detached dwellings and single-family attached. To me, if you look at an attached, single-family attached, which is traditionally a townhouse, and then you look at a duplex, which is essentially a two-unit townhouse, how does the city define those two to kind of differentiate them versus this sort of 2 to 4 unit buildings, which is a single family, maybe that's been converted or something? All of that is pretty confusing, and you're fairly specific where in one area you can get up to the semi-detached, and in the other you get to the single-family attached. And I just wanted to hear from you your take on that.
Plus, that really comes down to a difference of form. So in some neighborhoods, it's perfectly appropriate to have single-family attached homes as part of a larger mix of types of housing. But they really are a different kind of scale when you're talking about going, potentially down a long block without a break. Whereas the semi-detached dwellings are a way to offer more types of housing in neighborhoods, and in fact, they already exist within these neighborhoods, but take the form of a single-family house. And in many cases, sometimes even have one door, and you wouldn't even realize that there were 4 units in there. So it's just a different kind of housing that we wanted to be able to formally recognize as already being part of our character, and it is different than townhomes.
So the key statement in that is takes the form of a single-family house. The
Right.
rest sort of trails behind. Okay. Because when you read the rest and you read the list, many of those I would consider to be kind of single-family attached. So I understand that now. Thank you. One of the things that's somewhat confusing is when you have these sections that identify the areas where you have sort of the T3 or the T on each one of the transect zones. We've only gone through 2 areas. And when you go through this, I'm assuming that ultimately when we finish them all, you'll see all of it. And I was just curious if there's any way we could add transects have not yet been defined in these areas or something along those lines, because it makes it look like other than 3 and 6, we don't have any of those transects anywhere else. And
Yeah.
I think the vision is ultimately we will
I think
everywhere.
In one of my messing around with these maps, they were sort of more grayed out, they were almost like as if they hadn't been colored in yet at all. So I can just kind of mess with the coloring of that, see if that comes across as more evident, or do you think specific text is necessary?
No, if you want to do it that way, that's
Okay.
fine. I mean, the colors on this scale are very hard to see.
Yeah.
And, I don't know if ultimately,
We
if
did get a new printer this week, though, so
Okay,
everything
good.
is looking up.
are all of the building heights listed all supported by the current underlying zonings? Or would you have any conflicts or are they just height-based versus stories? I think we talked about this before, and I'm just curious, by making recommendations in here, if there's any allowed height today that then the comprehensive plan would either be in, not necessarily support. I mean, could you do more than, in a T3, can you do more than a 3-story today?
35 feet.
So probably not.
Yeah, I think everything's generally consistent with the zoning, yes, sir.
Okay. And the same thing about the density recommendations, when you have maybe appropriate, is this transect is characterized as up to 8 to 16 units per acre, for example, in the T4? most of those would be like a CT or something like
Right,
that.
so-
Would that support that?
Yes, so, CT right now is 8 units per acre with 12 with a mixed use and some other things, so yeah, that's right in line with that. We tried to, knowing that transects we're still kind of learning what they all mean, we tried to
Right.
tie them to our existing numbers and our existing zoning to kind of make that translation a little easier.
Yeah, my general understanding is that this is defining everything by transects, but isn't really necessarily changing density that we have today,
Right,
except for areas where you have the makers, and we've talked about some of the things like that.
right. Something
So I just want to make sure that we're consistent, that we don't have recommendations in the comp plan that are different than the underlying.
I think they are different.
Okay,
That it seems to me that some of the proposed transect zones will necessitate increased zoning or different zoning than what's on those properties today.
Which transects are you talking about, sir?
Well, like the residential one was, the T3. In fact, if you look at the drawings that I got, I don't know whether other people got them, these drawings that show the current zoning as opposed to the transects. And then you have another drawing that shows the proposed zoning, and they are different. And so I think it's very important that when we look at these transects, that we consider also the proposed zonings for those transects. I think you have to look at it together, because they are different.
Yeah, we're right, and Mr. Pace is making a good point. T3, sorry about this, it's gonna be like this.
You talked yourself out this afternoon.
Yeah. We've got 4 to 8 listed. Those numbers would correlate to R4 and R8. So these are generally put onto our existing neighborhoods. And the goal for our existing neighborhoods is protection first. We don't want to, like you've said, create transects that then prompt change within the existing core of the neighborhoods where these are designated. What Mr. Pates is talking about, the R8 idea, and this is a very low priority, there are portions of our neighborhoods, well, our residential neighborhoods, the existing density ranges from 4 to 16 units an acre. These are single-family home neighborhoods. That's one nonconformity. And then the lot sizes and the building types, like you're talking about semi-detached. I lived in a semi-detached in your neighborhood for a long time. Those types of uses are currently non-conforming in our zoning ordinance. We're basically, our neighborhoods are all zoned R4. One way to help the neighborhoods, and this kind of goes back to part of our tour, was to go down Bunker Hill Street and look at that, the 2 houses. And a neighborhood had an idea of, hey, let them be a duplex and have more room on the side yard. That would be something that would be permitted in R8, but not in the R4 zoning. We had to tell them, no, it's illegal. So these 2 numbers, 4 to 8, they don't come near the existing zone density on the ground. One idea would be to do a rezoning of the T3 areas to R8 to make them more conforming, like the neighborhoods south of William Street are zoned R8. So that is in the plan. If you do that, you do permit 1 additional lot in those neighborhoods, and it's at the end of Green Street, and it's over by the canal. We did the math and went through and made sure that if we made this recommendation, we weren't gonna suddenly create a ton of lots in the neighborhood. But to be clear about it, we did find 1 that you could do at the end of Green Street. So we were viewing that as a way to protect the existing neighborhoods. If you all wanted to proceed with that rezoning, that could be an implementation step. But the transect, again, the density numbers there, they don't even approach, they're tied to R4 and R8, which are single-family zoning districts, but they don't approach the neighborhood numbers yet. It's complex.
Well, I see it somewhat differently, but I don't want to get into that whole debate right this minute. But I think that's one reason I think that we should look at the implementing ordinances for this Area 6 in conjunction with the comp plan amendments to make sure that they are consistent with each other, because I don't think they are right now. And not having the zoning ordinances in front of us, there are so many unknowns about how they would be implemented. For example, the transfer of development rights. I think that the devil is in the details of that concept. And while it may be very good, I think that we ought to do our homework and consider them together. And I don't think that would be that difficult or time-consuming. But I wanted to just ask you, in terms of our discussion and public hearing tonight, I mean, I have a whole lot of questions and comments, but do you think we should go ahead and open the public hearing and let people have their say first before we go into all that, or how do you want to deal with it?
Yeah, I'm open to that. I think sometimes the public can benefit from some of the discussion beforehand. But if the members would like to go ahead and open up the public hearing and get some more input from the citizens and the folks attending tonight, I'm happy to do that. Okay. Well, then we will go ahead and open the public hearing on, we have two items. Is that correct, or are we combining these into one? We have an amendment to Chapter 10 and an amendment to Chapter 11. Are they all together as one?
We have them designed as one, so chapter 11 being the small area plan for Area 6 itself, and chapter 10 being the land use plan general section that's already been amended with Area 3, that'll just be updated to include the new transects that we've got in Area 6. So it's in conjunction.
Okay, so we will open up the public hearings for comment. You have 5 minutes to speak to the Planning Commission. Come up to the microphone, please state your name and address. And then you have 5 minutes to address the Planning Commission on any comments you may have on this plan. This is not a back and forth, but for you to share your comments for discussion with the council. And we'll take that into consideration as we look at this further. So with that, I'll open up the public hearing. If anyone wishes to speak about this item tonight, please come forward.
Yeah, a whole bunch of them. There are a whole bunch of different.
Good evening.
Good evening.
I'm Bill Leonard. I live on Fall Hill Avenue next to 2300. I'm also a member of the Fall Hill Association. I've attended many of the Street Sense meetings and presentations, as well as had discussions with many of my neighbors and the people in the association. I have two major concerns with the land use plan. We attempt to merge the street sense study into the comprehensive plan. There are many things said that we had that never got included, never got considered. So you're going to hear those tonight. I do not support the Maker District name, nor the concept of encouraging small business that often has a high failure rate. That's not going to save the Princess Anne corridor. That's not what we need in this town for our people. And I spent guest speaker from Street Sense trying to talk to him about small things and bigger things. And the only thing I could get from him was he kept telling me about manufacturing soap in this small place that had manufactured soap. And that's wonderful. I don't have anything against small business. But that's not going to fix the Princess William Section 6 issue. I think it was a tough issue. They didn't have anything else to do, so they slapped took one off the shelf and said, oh, the Maker District, we can make that fit. That fits anything. I'm going to tell you, folks, soap is not going to fix our problem. And if you think it is, then we all just might pack up and leave tonight. We tried to be heard. We wrote papers. We talked to people. Nobody listened. Here's our vision for what a lot of the vacant buildings and what that should be. It ought to be classrooms, it ought to be training facilities, and we ought to be giving people job skills. Instead of propping people up from the bottom, we ought to be helping them from the top and giving them skills so they can function on their own. In terms of housing and everything else. I want to read to you, just for a second, from your bosses. This is the council priorities from 2017 and 2020. The first paragraph is only 2.5 lines. I'm going to take some verbiage out of that. We want to be an employment epicenter. That didn't show up. We want to have excellent education and training options. That sure didn't show up. We want advanced technology. That was the guidance to you. They got it right, you got it wrong, and we want to make it right in section 6. Demand is there for jobs and for training to get people off the street and to help our people. Nothing in this plan that you presented does that. We've got all kinds of help here. University of Mary Washington, Humana Center for Advanced Technology, who spoke at the July meeting, and it was quite extensive in your own notes, talking about jobs and training. We have local high schools in great need for help in their vocational programs. Vocational programs take lots of space. This is what I'm told. I'm not an educator. Takes lots of space. They need that space for classrooms, so they're cheating that. Plus, the instructors are hard to come by if you're talking about real vocational stuff and teaching kids how to do it. I'm a storyteller, so I'm going to tell you 2 stories. And I will tell you, that comprehensive thing, I'm going to go over 5 minutes. I'm not done yet. I listened to the governor speak about 8 months ago. And he went to community college down in Richmond that did vocational training. He met a young man right out of high school, didn't want to go to college, but he wanted a job and he was willing to work. Welding. Feedback was that the kid did very well. Graduated on Monday. He graduated on Friday. On Monday, he was at the Newport News shipyards as an apprentice welder. And he would make, when he finished his apprentice program, between $60,000 and $70,000 a year. No college, no nothing, just training and hard work. I just talked to a computer tech who works for the county in Northern Virginia. Young man got out of high school several years ago. This guy's got some miles under his belt. But he went in the Army right after high school, got out, came home, didn't know what to do. Said, saw an ad, or heard an ad on the radio, computer school. So he went down and signed up. Did his school, about 9 months. He said, I really got had because I didn't even get a certificate. He said, I didn't know enough to ask for a certificate. They didn't issue one. Bad school, shouldn't even have been there. But he said, I went over to the county because they were advertising for people, and they hired him on as a tech, the lowest level of anything. This guy's never entered a university or a college, never set foot in one. And he's been working about 20 years now. Not like the high school kid. But he told me, he said he was really proud. He said, I just got a raise last month. I said, really? He said, yeah, I'm making $86,000 a year now. That's the capability we have to do this for our people. That ain't gonna do it, folks. Not in 100 years will that do it. Or or 10 or 20 like it. They don't have to be so, all the little things that are in the. So my recommendation is that we rename the Maker District to something that will draw educators, trainers, and students. Define our vision for Princess Anne in Area 6 as a Fredericksburg skill training area for employment growth of our people. We can make small job centers such as soap shops like this. We don't need those. They're not going to help us. It was nice that they put that in. It might make some people feel good. But let me tell you, here's what's going to do it for us. Hard skills and automation. That'll do it. Missed it. All of you missed it. My second concern is in zoning. I'll try to cut this short. Very simply, I don't have anything against the TDR, except you don't have one. You ask us to vote on TDR. As far as I know, not one word has been written. You have to develop the plan. You can't put this in a comprehensive thing just based on TDR. That puts the camel's nose under the tent. Okay? You're supposed to guard that tent. And if you let this in, you've blown it. What you have to do, somebody, you have staff, I don't, I have to do my one more. What you have to do is develop the program, and it's got to be comprehensive. And as Mr. Pate said, we've got to be able to bounce this off of what we have now. How are you going to implement it? Who's going to run the bank for that? You need a bank, because you have value that doesn't always transfer directly with the closing of the properties. You have to have a lot of things, and you have done nothing to do that. So, in my opinion, TDR comes off the table. Will not support it. I don't know whether I would or not. There's nothing to support. You haven't done anything with it. So, it ought to fall off everything until you can get the program up. It can be vetted, and then it can be voted on.
Mr. Leonard, I'm going to have to ask you, if you don't mind, could you please wrap up your comments, if you wouldn't mind?
Yeah, but we don't have a big crowd here tonight.
I understand. I think and we'd be happy to talk to you outside this as well to follow up.
I'm not necessarily against TDR. We don't have one. It doesn't exist. So how can you ask us to vote? Take it off. Get it off the table. I'm also concerned about, I will tell you, I went through that study and I tried they're great maps. I'm a pretty good map reader. I spent 30 years in the Army. But I will tell you, I can't make heads or tails of them. They may be great for civic planning, but I couldn't sort out what current rules are and what they might be if this gets implemented. So I think you need to really take a look at that. And I'll leave you with a little story. I'm done. When you go home tonight and you put your head on your pillow, I hope you're mad. And you say, who is that crusty old from Fall Hill Avenue who came up here and told us we blew this, we didn't do our job right, we didn't listen to our guidance, and we got it all wrong. And so toss and turn a little bit. And then when you get ready to go to sleep, maybe you say, maybe he's got it right. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Leonard. Anyone else wish to speak on this matter tonight?
Hello. My name is Christian Zamis. I live at 616 Greenbrier in Alum Springs. So I do not live in the proposed district, but I am a business owner of Katora Coffee, which is on Caroline Street. So I am a owner in the downtown district. I have been attending the Makers District meeting conceptual events for the past few months, and so I'm seeing this from a different perspective. And unfortunately, I haven't heard the concerns that the gentleman that just spoke before me has voiced, and I have unfortunately missed the previous city council meeting because I was at the shop. But as far as I'm concerned, being a small business owner and understanding the term Maker District from living in different cities and seeing what the Maker Districts have done for other cities. I've been to Asheville. I've most recently been to the Vibe in Virginia Beach. I also lived in Raleigh, North Carolina, which has a phenomenal downtown scene that is a combination of technology, of small artisan businesses that aren't set up to fail. And being somebody that moved here homeless and now owning a business that is 10 months old, I can attest personally that this town doesn't set up small businesses for failure. I do agree that there are some things that were mentioned in the comprehensive plan as far as being an employment epicenter, the direction for that the city council was given for finding to set up as an employment epicenter in educational and advanced technology. Those things, from what I know, are also special districts that have been formed for the whole downtown area, and that there's tax incentives for companies that adhere, that bring in business and that, you know. So I think that we haven't missed the mark on that. And this is just me personally speaking. I believe that a maker by term is someone that is someone that uses their hands. They might not just make soap, but they might make video games. They might be somebody that hopefully is going to be a master at what they do and want to take on apprentices. So definitely when you're looking at a non-traditional approach for education, somebody that might be coming out of high school that is directly across the street and might not be able to get into Mary Washington or a traditional four-year school, they might be, they have that allure of a maker district that is more apt to be someplace that will kind of be that difference from what our downtown already has. We have a historic area. We have an area that is not, I mean, you have restrictions. You can't get certain things done. You can't do things because you want the area of downtown to look a specific way. In this area, as long as we're protecting what I believe to be the residents and making sure that we're not overpopulating the area, and I think that's where you would be concerned, Mr. Pates, as far as not, you know, over inundating the residents with more traffic and more people, but at the same time, from what I noticed with the designs, we would have people be able to walk from downtown to the area, and then potentially from the school over to the area as well, and then by connecting all three of the zones using greenways. I mean, these are the things that we're talking about in the meetings that we're having, and I know there's a lot more to be discussed, and I believe that we should not turn down the concept of this. I personally, and I know I'm getting a little worked up here, but I feel strongly that if we support the combination of traditional and non-traditional, that as a city that we can keep some of the people, some of the talent that is leaving to go to DC and go into Richmond, and that we can keep them here. Because we have a beautiful city, we have a city that has a great average income, and you have some amazing, I don't want to see these kids have to go through the traffic and go somewhere else. It would be nice 3 years from now to have a vibrant area, that we could attract new businesses and that we could start educating people through the exchange of skill rather than just sending them elsewhere. Thank you, guys. Thanks for letting me speak.
Thank you, Mr. Samus. Anyone else like to speak? Okay. All right, then we will, going once, twice. Okay. Close the public hearing. Thank you for your comments. We'll bring it back to the commission.
So, Mr. Chairman, before Mr. Pates starts with his questions, this afternoon, so I want to thank the city folks, the planners, because it was quite informative. Can I just ask, are we on a timeline here?
I believe we have, is it 90 days from August
14th.
14th? Okay, so do we have another meeting between now and then? Okay, our next meeting is our deadline.
Okay, because there were some things that I heard this afternoon, that as I went back and started doing some reading, I'm sure that there are some questions that I have. But it just kind of looking through those right now and thinking about them. And I'm sure that some of what Mr. Pates is about to bring up goes to some discussions we had this afternoon. And I was just wondering if we are trying to get to a recommendation this evening.
I think it's up to us. We have until our next meeting. So, I mean, whether commissioners are comfortable or if there are lingering questions, I mean, we have time.
Chairman, I mean, I know that we're supposed to be acting on ordinances that are sent to us within 90 days, but I'm sure on something like this that the council would be willing to indulge the planning commission if we sought more time.
Okay.
Please, Mr. Pates.
Well, Jim, do you mean more time to like November 14th or some point after that, is what I'm getting?
After that.
Okay,
I'm
because we
sure.
only have one meeting in November, so let's make that clear.
Well, we could have 2 meetings in November.
Yeah, it would fall on Thanksgiving or the night before, and I won't be here, sir.
So, I think before we go down that route, I think we need to formulate our list of issues we need to work through. And I think we need to do our best effort, or put out our best effort to try to get comfortable with those issues. If that requires additional meetings with staff or, whatever that may be, I think we should give it our shot. If we don't feel comfortable at that point, we could certainly ask. But I think we've talked about this in a number of meetings, and I think we need to, for staff's benefit and for the council's benefit, we need to hone in on those things that we are having issues with that we want more time to think about instead of, kind of leaving it open, give us more time. I think we should be specific. Yes, Suzanne?
So in an attempt to be prepared, I did go ahead and consult with the city attorney's office about what we would do if you all did think that you needed more time, even if you felt confident that you could act out on the 14th, but, just to have options. And she said that her recommendation would be that you could make a motion, second and voted it to be recorded, to ask city council for additional time due to the complexity of the issues and things like that. She would recommend that you would put another specific time on it, not just leave it open-ended, but put yourself at a specific time on it, and then it would go to their meeting probably on the consent agenda, which is the 13th of November. So you would be, right on track to continue it on the 14th.
Okay. So I guess by tonight, we need to determine whether or not we feel we feel it's appropriate to make that request.
Right.
If you think you would need more time, or if you feel like, we could resolve things by the 14th.
I'd like to ask a couple questions. Specifically, Mr. Leonard had brought up a couple of things that I recognize are in the vision statement. The vision is citywide. We're talking Area 6 right now. So fitting everything from the vision into Area 6 is not necessarily the goal here, but parts that do complement the area. One thing he did talk about is training facilities, job skills. It seems to me that that does, is it Zamos? Zamas. As Mr. Zamas brought up, I mean, I think it does fit within the definition of a maker's district. And I'm just curious if you might be able to recommend some ways to try to incorporate that in to the maker definition. Because I do think the idea, they're not mutually exclusive to have either a maker's district or a, you know, this job training. I think they
And
do.
I think that's 100% what we've been envisioning, so.
Okay.
He was right on.
I mean, I don't, maybe we need to have another conversation with Mr. Leonard, but that's the whole point of the Maker District, is to be an employment center. I mean, the training, everyone's in favor of training, I think it's a great thing, but then you've got to have a place to go have that job, and obviously we're not gonna have a shipyard here, but we would have some other kind of activity, that folks would be trained to follow through on. So I think that's exactly what we're trying to do, is create an employment epicenter here, so.
In many ways, we've done some additional analysis on things through the market study and street, that's right, in the process that we're working on right now, and Area 6 already is an employment hub. So we're really just continuing to improve upon the tradition of the area that already exists in that way.
So do you think that Mr. Chairman, do you think that in the sessions that have been had on the small areas, maybe there is still a lack of understanding as to the terminology of maker and some of the things that the city council is looking to do here? And maybe we need to figure out how we, better market, phrase, talk to the community about these things.
Absolutely. One of the things that we've talked about with the Maker Committee that we just haven't come to a conclusion yet amongst ourselves is what exactly should we call ourselves? Because people do struggle with the name. But once, they share their vision, and when we share what we've written here, it seems to align. So it's just it's a question of identity at this moment, for sure. But, that's the goal, is to get to a good name.
Mr. Gant, I think one other interesting thing is that, we've always kind of struggled with the name, but it's also taken root. When we had the Area 7 charrettes and meetings, people would point to the warehouse district and say, that's like the maker district that you're doing on Princess Anne. So it's kind of like, people are referring to it in the community now too, and it's kind of taken hold. So we have seen that as well. Just want to point that out.
So I just want to highlight some. So is it a generational aspect though? I mean, because, when you think about it, as unfortunate as it sounds, I see all these heads going, behind you. And of course, the gentleman who is here, I mean, there is a difference there. I'm just wondering if there is a generational aspect going on with an understanding of adventurism as well as stability. So there is a...
I think you're right on. I mean, it's, when he held up the hammer and I wish he was still Mr. Here in the clip together, it's like you could make that almost the symbol of what we're trying to do. So feel good about people's vision for this district. I think we're doing the right thing here.
Well, and I think the issue is what's in the comp plan and what's the mechanism for incentivizing it. I mean, the comp plan does not outline the incentive package, and I think it was a little bit to his point is you've got these things like the TDR in here, but we don't have the mechanism. We've got kind of a lot of talk in here about incentivizing or whatever, but we don't have that mechanism yet. So there's a lot of, I think, discomfort with the idea of putting those things in there without being ready to define them. And I think that's something we need to get our arms around, particularly with the TDR and some others, is if we're recommending that here, what's the next step? When we do get it, we've already made a recommendation for the TDR, now, we're sort of, and I personally, I think the TDR is a good tool in the right place. I think what most people are uncomfortable with is wanting to be able to define where's the right place and what isn't the appropriate place for it. So I think that's the challenge we have right now. This is the first part of this, and it's got a lot of data in here without, having worked out the mechanisms for achieving those goals.
Mm-hmm. One of the things about that I struggle with the Maker District is how it would be implemented. I mean, there's nothing wrong with the idea at all, and I think it's kind of an appealing idea. But like, I keep going back to like the zoning. In order to accomplish what you're trying to do with the Maker District, what zoning changes exactly would be needed?
So we're sort of imagining it would be the creation of a new zoning district to represent what is this new sort of,
Okay.
urban mix. What were we calling it the other day? Was it?
Maker, we would
Maker
call it, it
community.
would be like a maker zoning district. And we can give you what we've got in terms of outlines, 'cause we do have outlines. And it's everything we talked about on the tour. So from a use standpoint, we don't want to change the base uses, with the exception of, we need to talk about car dealerships. What's the future car dealerships in the district? Retail is a part of this district. Offices and employment are part of this district. The one added concept with the Maker District would be, we need to work on the definition of light manufacturing and production, and figure out how we can get people who are doing things like Fraser Wood Elements on the one hand, and other people who are technically gonna be defined, like our violin maker is another good example in the Jackson District. That use was approved when it was an industrial zoning district. But it's a use that's great for that area, and there's gonna be more of a demand for over the next, coming 30 years. So we wanna make that a component, so add that component. Not that everything has to be maker, but that we add that component and make sure that it's legal, to do in that area. There's residential in the current zoning district, and residential would remain in what's proposed. And we can give you the basic outline on that too. It's everything we've talked about. We want to keep the base residential densities the same, with the incentive going from what is currently a mixed-use incentive, 8 to 12 units an acre in the CT zoning district, changing that to, you're either going to use TDR or you're going to use affordable housing, and that's how you would get an increase there. So we can certainly make that all available to you all if that's helpful. That's the basic level of outline we have. We've got to walk the line between launching into a year-long effort of getting these finalized through the city attorney's office, coming back, working with everyone on these details, and only to find out at the end of that process that, we're not into that. If this is gonna be a tool as part of the toolbox, good. And then we can, we approve the plan and we move forward and define the concept, and we'll all together collectively be the ones that are coming up with the data on that. The public will have another opportunity to weigh in. It's another public hearing process. This comprehensive plan isn't gonna adopt TDR, for example. But it would be one of the tools in the toolkit that we would then develop, bring back to you all for public hearing.
I think one of the reasons that it's kind of hard for people to wrap their minds around some of these concepts is when you don't know how it's going to work in practice. For example, okay, let's say that you take the old Coca-Cola building, okay, on Princess Anne Street. That's in the Maker District, okay? And somebody wants to redevelop that site and have some a light manufacturing production, making soap or widgets or whatever you want to call it. Right now, at that site, that's CH zoning, correct? Yes. Okay. So right now, somebody could put residential units in that building?
Yes.
Okay. And under your proposal, where a lot of these uses would be mixed in together, and I think that's part of the appeal of it, is that you have a lot of dynamic uses and changes and throwing things together. And so in that sense, if you wanted to take that one property and have a maker use in it, the only thing that would probably change then would be that you would add that sort of light manufacturing use to CH.
Well, we need to figure out the parameters of that use, go through the ordinance. But yeah, you're right with that.
Because there's some light manufacturing by definition that wouldn't be compatible. So you
Right.
probably, you need to,
We would, after the plan is adopted, we come back and start working on what that ordinance is. What are the acceptable versions of light manufacturing? And a lot of it is just components. I mean, just assembling computer components. I mean, that was a big thing when we heard light manufacturing. I mean, This is a nuance of the 1980s when things were really kind of spread out and put in boxes. The boxes are too small and they're not keeping pace.
Well, I think that might be a more useful way to talk about this, that it's new in the sense it's not just that we're creating a new district where all these new and innovative things are going to take place, but rather take what you have there now, the uses that are there, the zoning that you have there now, and to look at how it might change in terms of uses. Uses are one of the things that I think are of greatest concern to people, because often the proposed uses of property are not very appealing to people, particularly if they are living nearby. But it seems to me that this would be something different, different than what we have now, although in some ways it's very similar to downtown, where you have all these mixed uses of people having stores and living up above them. But now here, in this district, what you might have is some light manufacturing business with people living upstairs. And it might not be any more dramatic than that.
And that's sort of what is already going on in some instances and what had historically gone on when those buildings were first built. So we're just kind of reverting them back to what the use for which they were
One
intended.
of the big changes might be is instead of having a building like the Coca-Cola building strictly for commercial uses, as it has been, is that people might be living in that building along with other kinds of production businesses, which could be very interesting. I mean, but I think that we need to think and talk about this district in those terms of how it would actually, how we envision it actually working out, and what would we think would be good to be right there, rather than just the abstract transects. It's very hard for people to relate to that, you know.
And I get that, Mr. Bates, and the discussion we're having right now is a comp plan level discussion in my mind. And the way that you're talking about this, these ideas are comp plan level discussions. The rubber meeting the road, the details of that ordinance are gonna be another process. We're gonna go through it. We're getting ready to go through a process on Area 3 on November 14th at your meeting. We're gonna look at the first T5C shopping center form-based code element. We gotta do that again with Maker District. So that's, we're trying to balance that level here with you all. What are the ideas that we can keep in the toolbox? And then once that's approved, we'll start implementing them and bringing them back to you guys, and we'll go through the details, and we'll do tours and do all the kind of work that you all are gonna expect
Well,
of us.
let me ask you this. For your Maker District, I have seen it largely in terms of a vehicle for the transfer of development rights. Do you see the Maker District as being a viable idea and something to implement with or without TDR?
Sure, you could, but this is what we think the Maker transects are. And part of the tour was trying to communicate that we want to come up with boxes of tools, little toolboxes, to solve the different problems. Say that every 5 minutes. We've identified that there are certain problems that recur throughout the city. We don't want to retail plan every single site, every block in the city, and come up with a real thread of different ideas and solutions block by block. We know that aging shopping centers are going to need the same type of treatment on Area 3 that they will in Area 6. So we built that box, and we want to just put it down there. The Maker transect is a similar concept. It's part use. It's part affordable housing, which is in there. It's a part, how do you preserve these buildings? And TDR is one idea, and we think it's a good one. We hope you all support that. If there are other ideas, and we heard one from Mr. Hornung we talked about today, a strategic acquisition program. If that's another idea to put in the toolbox for this type of corridor, we're gonna have a lot of similar questions at the Jackson Street warehouse area, in Area 7. So we wanna get a sufficient set of things that we don't have to reinvent the wheel over and over and over again. We're protecting the neighborhoods. We know that the same issues here, we can kind of, and then move on to what may be more of a unique problem down the corridor in Lafayette corridor a little bit, you know, so that's, I hope I'm communicating this well. We view this as a potential box of policy ideas, that we know we have to come back and work through the details with you all on.
Yeah, and Mr. Bates, my understanding was TDR was really more of a preservation of structures issue than it was tied to the Makers District. It was primarily looking at some of those structures and that may not be in great shape, and rather than having them be torn down for redevelopment, to help incentivize reuse of those buildings, which may not be as economical or as profitable than knocking them down.
Right. May I
Anybody else want a quick turn, or you guys?
Well,
I'm
welcome anybody else?
It's always educational.
If I could just chime in and add, echo what you're saying. I mean, these are different concepts. They're related, but they are separate. We cannot simply just amend the highway commercial zoning district, because there's other areas that are zoned highway commercial. They don't have the unique characteristics that this corridor has in terms of its building character and its history within the city. So in order to create a diversity of employment opportunities, as Mr. Leonard wants us to do, which I think we're all in agreement with, a different concept of zoning needs to be applied that is more mixed use than any previous zoning district. Parallel to that, and what makes this corridor unique and special and potentially eligible and worthy for the economic potential of being a maker district, is that it does have these 19th and early 20th century structures in them. We all recognize that a traditional historic district carries certain issues and responsibilities and
Benefits.
and becomes a challenge. and so we're trying to incentivize it, trying to create something proactive instead of reactive, something that's not regulatory, but an encouragement and incentive is what the TDR program attempts to do. It does strike me that and I just sort of say this as a thought for further discussion. As I look in the text that we have presented before you, we have some very strong verbs in there about establishing a district and establishing a TDR program. And perhaps it's the commitment to establishing a TDR program without knowing all the fine details that causes hesitancy. But I think we can develop a TDR program. We can perhaps use this, perhaps a slightly different word, that is the policy to develop the program with the idea that we've got to make sure that all the bells and whistles are attached. I will tell you that it took several months for us to get the form-based code regulatory concepts through the city attorney's office, and that's not a criticism. It's complicated.
Yeah, right. I know.
It is, and the city attorney's office relied on an outside attorney who had more experience dealing with form-based codes, and that's perfectly appropriate. I mean, I don't criticize that at all. But form-based code is a relatively more common concept than transfer of development rights. Transfer of development rights is even more complicated and more of a nut to crack, in that we only have one other urban TDR program in the state to model ourselves on. So we're going to find a former county attorney for Arlington who would be able to make our city attorney comfortable with it, and that's perfectly appropriate. I don't want that to be perceived in any way a criticism. So I think we could pursue or create or seek to achieve a TDR program, and maybe if we backed off of the word established, it sounds like we're going to do it.
Well, I was thinking about this today on our tour, that the section of the plan here talks about revitalization. I think I'd like to suggest that be reworked somewhat. And instead of saying, we're going to establish a TDR program, to kind of flip that around and say, what are our goals here, okay? And our goals, it seems to me, are to redevelop, improve, upgrade our existing shopping centers that are currently CH. I think another one is your preservation goal, and there are probably some others. And I think actually a goal probably is to mix the uses together. I think that's part of the appeal of it. But then say, these are our goals, and here are 4 ways that the city may want to achieve these goals. And put TDR as one. Mike always likes to use the word toolkit. It's such planning jargon. But anyway, 4 alternatives. One might be TDR. Another one might be the strategic acquisitions. Another might be a historic district. Another might be a conservation district. I mean, there might be half a dozen things that could be used to achieve those goals. And I think that would make people feel much more comfortable because we can agree on the goals, but defer decisions on how it would be implemented.
You know, I think that was kind of the idea here, but I think there are specific mentions in this. You know, for example, there is map 23, the Area 6 Transfer Development Rights map. It's almost like codifying in some way this map showing what's a sending and receiving area, that I think we may be a little ahead of ourselves on that.
Well, that map
That's-
was done in response to requests that we be more specific as to what we were proposing.
Well, Chuck, you know, we reserve the right to change our minds. I think in the context of this conversation, though, you know, maybe as we were trying to develop that, to understand it, I do agree that there's a lot more work involved in understanding it, and that maybe this more general approach of the idea and explanation of the idea would be a better path.
Because if we had the zoning ordinance now and all the details worked out, I'd say, sure, okay, we either vote TDR up or down. But since you want to do this first, then it seems to me that we ought to build the flexibility in there to achieve the goals and agree on the goals.
I'll just say, I think you have to do this first. But
Want to check on that real quick, because I think that there may be a legal requirement for us to designate sending and receiving areas in the comprehensive plan, should we want to implement TDR. So I just wanted to double
This
check on
stems
that.
from a state code requirement for TDR lit program.
So simply mentioning it as a tool in the toolkit triggers the need to show a map or not?
Option.
You need,
You gotta show the sending and receiving
I don't
areas
think
as
so.
a policy statement.
I don't believe that.
right.
And we're happy to share the state code with you, but that's a parameter that we have to establish. Now, there's nothing to be said that we can't discuss that this is a tool to be used, but simply saying, if a TDR program were to be established, this would be the sending and receiving areas. I mean, you can.
Then you can go back and amend the comp plan once you've decided that.
Actually, we'd rather not do that. We'd rather.
I mean,
but
there can
we
definitely.
can conditionalize the text, so that it's.
I'm writing down here some notes that we can definitely make some more generalized statements about, you know, pursuing all options for incentives for targeted strategic redevelopment and things. So, you know, in one of our implementation steps, we've also got expand the arts and cultural district to incentivize creation and expansion of businesses. And I believe somewhere in the text we mentioned as well the value of potentially bringing back facade improvements. So we've kind of got them scattered, but perhaps putting all the tools in one box / paragraph may be useful to discuss all of our options.
Because these different options, each one is kind of complicated and controversial and may never fly. But it seems to me if we could agree on the different tools that might work, okay, and list those, then we would at least be giving a roadmap on how to try to achieve what we're talking about.
I agree. So in the interest of giving staff direction, things to work on, things not to work on, you don't need to work on that we feel, I mean, has everyone looked over the different transect zones and their designation on our maps of what's a T4,
Yes.
what's a T5? Are we generally comfortable with those areas and their definitions? I mean, is that something we can say, hey, these are the things that we may want to talk about again in the next meeting, but no further work needed between now and then? I'd like to kind of get
That would
it,
be helpful, thank you.
you know, give them some solid direction.
Well, do you want to talk about the
I'm
transects
comfortable.
generally? I mean, aren't they already in, except for the maker
You
transect?
have you do have, what, 2 new transects in this district? Because of Area 6?
Because of Area 6, 2 new transects are being added to the Chapter 10, the general land use section, in order that they may be applied in other areas as we continue the small area plan process. As we were looking before at the maps where we can see where all T3 is throughout the city, where all T4, all of those are now being fed in.
Well, the 2 new ones are the 2 maker districts?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. I certainly have no problem with those transects generally.
Mark?
No, I'm fine, except when we were riding around with you, I kept thinking, they gotta have little signs here. You're entering a
No, and-
T3A zone.
But the maps are a different story. As I mentioned this afternoon, I have some, can you put up the map that shows do you have a single,
That one?
well, that sort of does it, yes. If you look there at the T3E, okay,
Which is this neighborhood and then across Route 1.
right, Normandy Village, okay. And then the T3 area,
Which is the
okay,
slightly
which is
darker area.
there, and there.
Yes.
Those are all existing residential areas, primarily single-family detached dwellings, right?
They do have a mix of housing types, but a large amount of them is single-family detached dwellings, yes.
And they are all now currently zoned the same,
Yes.
yes. I don't see anything wrong with leaving those as they currently are. I don't see any benefits to having a map that shows greater development. And now, does that include any?
The difference between the T3 and T3E is really just adding the semi-detached, which is a common housing type in the E compared to in the 3 versus the 3E. I think that was the goal.
The 3E tends to be slightly larger lots, slightly larger setbacks. The 3 tends to be, the smaller setbacks, smaller lots, more of the mix. And the T3, as in the general chapter and chapter 10 says, is the R4 and R8. So nothing about this designation as the T3 requires it to be R8 to be conforming. It can remain just as it is. The recommendation that we have, which is not today, but we may have in a year or so, is that just to bring a little truth in zoning, that they could easily be R8 and would still be
Well-
more dense than that as they are today. But nothing about this changes what they exist.
And to implement this would require rezoning, wouldn't it?
Doesn't have to. The rezoning is just one idea to better protect the neighborhoods.
But Mr. Pace, I think zoning ought to reflect actual land use. I think there is a value in having zoning reflect what's on the ground. What's on the ground in the T3 area is non-conforming when it comes to the R4 zoning district.
Well, the city's full of properties that don't conform to their zoning. The city's full of them.
And so we should be fixing these, and so
I'm-
that we have accuracy.
I'm not so sure that we should, because,
You're in favor of inaccuracy?
listen, I'm in favor of trying to keep our residential neighborhoods pretty much as they are, okay? And I think that any kind of change, whether it's in the comp plan or in rezoning, that allows more intensive development. Like, for example, if you had in one of these neighborhoods, it's a T3 on here, if you had an acre, let's say, that was vacant, you would end up potentially with having more units on that acre than you do today.
That's
No,
not,
that's not actually true.
that's not the reality though, Mr. Pace. There isn't a vacant acre in T3 where that could occur, and in fact, the most recent infill circumstance, the zoning forced it to be separate single-family homes when the neighbors would prefer
Yep.
to be able to put in a duplex.
But That's a different
Let me say
problem.
something else.
That's exactly the problem.
No, it isn't.
We drove down the streets and played Guess the Zoning in a couple of cars. I don't remember which cars it was. Guess the density. The density levels 4 and 8 units an acre are not what your neighborhoods are. They're up to 16. So you cannot take this plan
So then what's the point of changing them?
to get the lots and the use types into conformance with the zoning. If you've got a duplex currently that's zoned R4 and it's a great use and everybody loves it, it's on your street, it's a common feature in my area, and the roof beams start to fail, you have a disfavorable zoning administrator who says that, who reads the non-conforming section one way, that use may have to be torn down. They can't fix their roof. That's inaccuracy in zoning.
Well, this gets into the whole issue of tear downs, which is one that concerns me greatly and our neighborhood greatly. And I don't think that the solution to the problem that we had on Bunker Hill, where you had, 2 lots, 1 house, and because there were 2 lots, the new owner decided to tear down the 1 house that was there and build 2 instead, okay? And those houses were not in conformity with that street, and it caused problems for the neighbors. And I'm not sure whether this non-conforming zoning on it, whether that may have impeded an appropriate solution to that problem. But I would like to see something in this plan that addresses the problems of tear downs. Now, it seems to me that we might be able to do that either through this plan or through a zoning ordinance change, but I think we really need to do something about it. And it's not just this neighborhood.
They have a tool for you.
So I'd just like to read you what we've got written. So in chapter 10, when we generically describe the transects, generally 1 to 2.5 stories, generally parks, playgrounds, those kinds of things. When we then get into the small area plans, we describe how that T3 is specifically found in that neighborhood. So for the T3 in Area 6, we say, in Area 6, neighborhoods on the east side of Route 1 made up of Rules Hill, 1923 neighborhood, established Doswell Field, 1924, and Elwood City, 1935. Subdivisions are categorized as T3. These neighborhoods have a tight network of connected streets of primarily small lot, single-family detached housing, so recognizing that as a key feature, with an additional mix of residential types with densities that far exceed the existing zoning. And that's the analysis we've done so far. These neighborhoods are well established and walkable. The majority of these neighborhood homes were built in the early and mid-20th century, and future infill should reflect the character with single-family detached and semi-detached homes of a similar scale and form. Townhomes are not currently found within these neighborhoods and are not appropriate for future development. With support from the majority of residents, these neighborhoods would benefit from the creation of a neighborhood pattern book or a character/conservation district. Current densities in these neighborhoods range from 8 to 18 units per acre. So we feel that that's a way of, specifically describing what is and is not appropriate, what is the character currently found, and how do we, make sure that that's a thing that's continuing. So, we've got the factor that, new infill and new development has to be compatible. And that a specific way that the neighborhood, if it so choose to implement that, would be to implement either the pattern book or the conservation district, but that has to be at the will of the residents.
That's not the only alternative.
Yeah, they could do a historic district on top of themselves.
I think there's several alternatives to address this problem, but I don't see this plan doing any of it.
What's your example, Mr. Bates? What do you have in mind?
On the tear down issue?
You said there are several other things that could be done. What are you thinking of?
Yes, I think and I haven't thought all this through, and there might be problems with it, but I don't see why it wouldn't be appropriate for the city as a whole to have a zoning ordinance change that limits the size of residences to make them more compatible with their neighboring properties, both in terms of setbacks, what do you call it, mass for the filling the lot and height. Because we're seeing it all over. There's a house going up right now in our neighborhood that completely dwarfs the next door neighbor. Completely. Cuts off their light, everything. And that shouldn't be allowed, I don't think. And I think that we can address that. We can address it both through the plan and also through a zoning ordinance. Now, I haven't worked out the details of it, but I know that other localities do it.
And you're asking for language to be put in this transect that would say something like, consider exploring zoning mechanisms to bring infill development more into conformance with surrounding neighborhoods. I don't know, something like this. Is that kind of what you're asking?
I think that would be helpful, yeah.
Yeah, I think there were some statements about appropriate and consistency of form in there that, you know,
I mean, that kind of goes to your form issue, doesn't it? I mean, that's sort of form.
so let me ask a couple questions. In your, sorry, guys.
No, go ahead.
Okay, so in your, say, T3, even though it may currently be an R4, a non-conforming lot in an R4, for the most part, are those lots larger than the minimum required under the R4? So, for example, in any case, would it make sense to buy an R4 lot, tear it down, divide it in two, and build 2 units? Or does the current ordinance prohibit that because you're at a lot size, the current lots are too small?
Current lots are smaller than what's allowed in R4, and in some instances are relatively similar to what the lot sizes that are permitted in R8. That would be the point, is that the R8 regulations, generally speaking, are much more consistent with the pattern of what's on the ground today.
Okay, so I know we're not talking about a rezoning, but down the road, this T3, which would in general support a potential look at possibly looking at doing an R8, wouldn't increase the number of units. Okay, so the second part of that question is, if you go to the T3, is the allowable use, the clause in here that says semi-detached homes, is that new, or are semi-detached homes already permitted in an R4?
They're not permitted in the R4, but it is a pattern within the T3 area. And therefore, we are legitimizing those that exist and giving that opportunity for them to occur as within the parameters that would be established.
So that's where I think we may have some work to do, because you have a situation where you could have single-family residents that under that ultimately, and tell me if I'm wrong, you could see more of a conversion to semi-attached in the future, which increases density, creates issues with parking and everything else. Where am I wrong?
Land area to do that. This is really, and we've done.
Why would you need more land area if it's an existing single-family structure that they're converting?
Yeah, the existing density in that area is already, 12 units an acre. You don't have enough land area to take a single-family home and put more units into it. You just don't. This is more of a tool to say, hey, that there are units there that are 3, units in a single-family home that have been non-conforming since they were built in 1945, and that we want to recognize them. They're a valuable part of our neighborhoods and our housing stock. And another good example would be,
But if you're recognizing them as they stand, how does that prohibit someone new from doing the same thing as what exists? Or or is it totally different form than a single-family home? Because it says in here it's a single-family home form.
Right. And they're on single-family lots. They're on the equivalent lot, like 3,000 square foot lot on one side of the street is single-family home. 3,000 square foot lot on the other side was built in 1945 as 3 units, and they're on the same size lot. So to come in today and try to take the other house on the other side of the street, whether it was R4 or R8, and add more units into it, the units per acre calculation is still less than 1. It's just not going to give you any.
Then could you explain to me what you were talking earlier about? I keep going back to Bunker Hill.
Yeah.
Okay, if that house, when it was torn down, how would aren't you saying that this proposed change would enable someone to have built a duplex there?
Because there were 2 lots.
Right.
So you just build one on one side, the firewall goes right on the property line, and you build one on one side, one on the other. and you put the
So,
space on the outside.
and why wouldn't that be allowed now?
Duplex is not allowed
It's
in
not
an
allowed in
R4.
R4. It's not a use type that's permitted.
Well, then why not just keep the R4 and say you can have a duplex by special use permit?
Well, because there's a lot of R4 around the city, that this is not the pattern of development.
We don't know what that would do down on Lafayette Boulevard.
The neighborhood I live in is zoned R4. There are no duplexes, maybe one or two. There are almost no duplexes in my neighborhood. And the lots are maybe at least 50 to 75% larger than the lots in this neighborhood. It is not a pattern development over the village neighborhood as it is in this portion of the Fall Hill.
And that's part of how we drew the boundary between the T3E and the T3, is we looked at the existing pattern of what types of housing already existed. So we weren't, you know, putting rules on a neighborhood that didn't fit that character. So where we've got the T3, it isn't prevalent to have duplexes and other types of housing. It's primarily single-family detached, with duplexes being a truly rare exception as opposed to a consistent pattern.
So with this, you may start seeing more duplexes in this area.
No, no.
No, because you only would get the duplex in the instance where there were two lots that potentially became available. Someone couldn't tear down, there'd be no net gain. Yes, you could have a duplex, but they'd tear down two single-family homes. So there's no economic benefit of replacing two houses with two houses. It would only come into play if there were larger parcels that could be subdivided, or in this rare instance where there was a vacant lot next to a house, next to a lot that had a house. And that is, I think we've distributed maps to you guys sort of showing this pattern. We can go over them again. I mean, there's a lot of information, and we can try to highlight those things, try to focus on them a little bit more, and sit down and walk through those.
All right, so I'm hearing, at least, I am comfortable with the delineation between a T4 in this area 6. I think in general, we're comfortable there. The issues that we, I think, need to discuss further, would like to get more information on the next meeting, is how we maybe modify this and its mention of things like the TDR, including things like the TDR area maps, which, you know, I'm not real comfortable making part of the comp plan right now. So if there's a way to modify that, I would like to see it. What were our other, the list of tools we were talking about? What else did we want more information
Well,
on?
I just wanted to say, I mean, I kind of hear that some of us are advocating that the city be able to mandate that somebody, if they tear something down, they have to replicate a building that was built 60, 70, 80 years ago versus personal property rights. Well, Jim, I know you did something about the College Avenue, the one that came out much bigger. You didn't like that, but my guess is long after you and I are gone, all the houses around it will be about that size, because they'll be tearing those down. That's what happens. Cities evolve, residentials evolve. That's all I have to say.
So what other direction do we want to give to staff between now and our November 14th meeting?
I also wanted to point out, too, that I was wrong about Thanksgiving. It's on the 22nd. If we did have a second meeting in November, it could be on the 28th. Hopefully we won't, but we could do that if we had to. Okay.
Chris, I had some comments about the T1 transect, again, with your maps, not the transect itself. But I realize that your map only shows, your map there on page 124 only shows the T1 areas in the two districts that we've been considering. That's kind of like like Chris was saying earlier, I think that's kind of misleading. Somebody looking at that map would not realize that. They would just look at saying, is this T1 only in two parts of the city? And also, I think in terms of the impact on the planning area, I don't know whether this is possible or not, but if you could show the T1 areas that are adjacent to Area 6 would be very helpful, because what you're trying to do is to show what kind of open space and public lands are available and impact this area. And there's several right in that are adjacent to, depends on how you draw the line, but there are some rather important T1 areas adjacent to Area 6, like Snowden Pond and the Gales Pond, and these areas don't show up on here. I don't know whether that's feasible to put them on this map or not, but I think it would.
We'll have to go through the formal process to designate those. I think what we're gonna end up doing is shading back the areas
Yeah.
where we haven't had an area plan, because we'll need to get that plan done and have y'all adopt those so that we can, and then at the end, I think the whole network will be shown, so hold that thought until we get to, I think that's Area 4. So hold the thought until we get to Area 4 and we'll.
Sort of like that.
Right.
Just that, to prevent confusion, to think that something had been skipped in an area, we'll just gray out the remaining 8 areas until we get there.
Or bold, an outline of 3 and 6 and say
Yeah.
completed, remainder under,
Sure.
being
Okay,
completed.
so, but I don't see anything in this plan that calls for any additional T1 areas in Area 6 than what exists today. Nor do I see any pocket parks or anything like that.
So T1 is specifically things that are environmental or natural areas. So that's why we've done the canal and primarily the riverfront as a way of implementing TMDL, stormwater management, those kinds of things in the future. Pocket parks and other green spaces aren't specifically called out because they are an integral part of each and every transect. In the general section in chapter 10 in T3, it'll say public space appropriate as schoolyards, parks, greens, squares, trails, and playgrounds, knowing that they could be dispersed throughout a transect, throughout a neighborhood, and would be perfectly appropriate without having to be specifically colored green.
Well,
for
but
every single one.
I don't think that's very helpful for planning purposes. To say it could be anywhere doesn't give you an idea. And it seems to me that as part of our job here is to look at each of these planning areas and say, what do we think may be needed in this area? We're,
Drawing your attention to page 189.
187.
I don't, 189.
Drawing attention to page 189, and maybe we could do a better job in choosing another color other than orange. What is shown in this map in orange, labeled as public and cleared spaces, are the sort of open space areas that we see points of focus. Some of those areas already exist. Some of those areas exist as open space and have not been sort of formally designated as such that we're suggesting for the planning process be retained either as public open space or as private open space. But I acknowledge that maybe this, maybe another shade of green as opposed to shade
And-
of orange would better communicate that they're open.
And I'm,
spaces.
Also flipping one page or 2 pages sooner, page 187, where we've got that redevelopment scenario. We specifically note that, if you're gonna undertake massive redevelopment of these parking lots, that, something of that scale should warrant its own sort of green space, and we've called that out there.
and I personally don't think it's right for us to identify T1 spots on private property that we feel should be public space until it goes through, I agree that as with each development, we should be encouraging it, but other than city-owned land that's designated as a park, I don't think it's our place to show areas that we think should be parks when,
It is the nature of T1 as transects generically are defined to be large open space areas, like Mill Park, not like the hospital park that's across the street from where you live. I think that's an appropriate area that ought to be left as open space, and that's not a quote T1 space. It is intended to be a plaza or a third space or open area within the development of a T, wherever it is, a T5 or T4 or T4M or wherever it is. Perhaps you need a better job of explaining that and clarifying that, I grant you.
So your T1 then is only descriptive of what currently exists?
Because that's the only areas of sort of large swaths of parkland, if you will, or natural areas. I mean, you notice that the trail is not actually, the canal is not shown as T1, it's shown as a civic, but it's an improved kind of an open space. Just a term or a concept that's viewed in T1 that,
What?
and I see that because there's publicly owned and easement lands all along the river as we go into the other sub-areas that will fall into the T1 category. But, for example, Camp Park in downtown would not be T1. It would be a public park or open space within the whatever transect it's.
I think we talked about this once before, but it seems to me that it might be more useful to combine your public lands with the T1, so that you would have both, open space and civic-owned property.
The concept of transects, and, this isn't sacred, but the concept of transects that is developed keeps those separate because civic spaces are, if you will, developed open spaces. They are.
I understand.
Park, as opposed to Old Hill Park, which is broad playing fields, large expansive areas. And that civic spaces are developed open spaces or developed public facilities like a fire station or school or this building, for example. So the nature of the concept of transect deviates that and helps to be a little bit more precise.
Well, you were talking, Chris, about not designating in our comp plan private property that we think should be open space, but isn't that essentially what you're doing on your map 24?
I think I guess I'm slightly disagreeing with the chairman's consent, and I think in the redevelopment within these transects, that we ought to be setting some sort of expectation in terms of common open space. I think that as something comes in a particular area, if it's shaped this way as opposed to that way, I think we can all, work through that and figure out if we could end up at the end of the day something comparable or similar. But the idea of having to be a policy of there, in these general areas that open areas or public plazas or third spaces need to be.
Yeah, I will just say I disagree in particular because some of the things on this map, if you kind of look at them on a microscopic level, may encompass, I don't know what these encompass. Could be one person's property on a block. And so we are showing in a plan, I don't know what this little orange, I think this is maybe the PNC building, and there's an orange square in the back of that. I don't know what that is, if it's part of that property or what, but I don't know why at this point, without any plan or a study, I agree that block should have an appropriate open space. Might be that size. Somewhere in that block would be great. I just don't think that this, if we're adopting a map like this, is identifying where these public and third spaces are, it sets a document basically saying this is it, and there's no, I don't know what the proposal is that's come forward that says this is compatible as an open space.
We can include language to say that this is intended as a guide and goal for development, redevelopment areas. I don't think, and that I was saying that shape this way as opposed to this way, that's a specific example I had in mind. And so I think we were trying to illustrate it perhaps.
Well, but I don't see, how is that any different than suggesting in our plan these T3 or T4 areas when it's different than what's the current use?
It's not.
Yeah, so why are we doing that? I just don't see any difference between saying as a planning tool that we think this area should be an open space long-term that doesn't have any binding legal effect on that property or that property owner. It's just saying, for example, I mean, you know, if I think every residential neighborhood in the city should have some kind of public space, a pocket park within X number of feet, within X number of feet of everybody's house, you know, so that every neighborhood has some kind of amenity like that. And let's say that there's only one block in an area that fits that bill, that's not developed. What's wrong with saying that would be a nice place for a pocket park? I don't see anything wrong with that.
I just don't think that that's on a comprehensive plan level, when we're looking at an entire area plan, that we're at the point where we should be planning where pocket parks go. And particularly when it's not part, you know, I mean, for example, I don't know what this is here. Is this the building, is this around the 1839 kitchen? So I don't know who owns that. I don't know what the redevelopment plan or preservation plan of that might be, but here we have a document that shows area all around it as public and third phase open space. I mean, would it be nice? Yes, it'd be great. But now if that person came in after this is adopted and said, I want to do something around this, we've got a document that says, well, we think it should be open space. From a property right standpoint, is that
Different than any zoning? You say, that we think this area should
because
be
we haven't gone
resident.
through a public hearing saying that property should be left alone. That property should be dedicated as a public space.
No,
I mean,
it's not saying that. I don't see how it's any different than any other, land use that you're calling for any property that's on this map. How's it any different?
I think it's a lot different because you're specifically showing a node that should be a public park on private property. I mean, that's
Yep.
a lot different than saying this area of the city should be a T3 transect versus a T3E transect that matches existing code. This is actually designating, in my opinion, it's showing areas that we identify as necessary, or not necessarily, as third spaces, public spaces, without,
Yeah,
it's
Mr.
not
Pates,
a city project, it's not public space, it's.
Mr. Pates, I share that. I think that would be a great idea, but I don't think we should just color it in, and shove it through committee. I do share with Chris that that's an admirable thing to do, but we should go through a more formal, let's talk about that and come up with a plan of how to do that in each section, and then give them guidance to, when we look at the next area plan, we would like to see pocket parks, but again, we need to be more thorough in doing that, in my opinion.
Well, I think you're right that, it certainly would require some thought, but if you're not looking into the future and having some kind of vision for the amenities that a neighborhood should have, it seems to me that you're not fulfilling your responsibilities as a planning commission. It doesn't mean it's going to happen. It could be that, what would be wrong with our plan saying that the city should consider acquiring property as open space?
I'm all for that. What I would like to see is this document lay out where we think there should be public spaces, just like you said, within X number of feet from every residential area or else. And then we ought to take on the task of identifying where should those places be. A lot of what's shown in this in orange is public spaces that are intended, I believe, to be on private property. The area we talked about with the hotel, the motor court, the area in the front. That would be considered under a development plan kind of a third space. But to me, designating this as a third space in the comp plan, identifying that, is setting, to me, an expectation that it may be public, that it will be developed that way, and we haven't gone through the process to identify those spaces. So I would recommend we make sure it's captured in the comp plan, and then we take on that effort of identifying where our needs and where these things go. We're not going to capture all of them. Some of them are going to have to come out of redevelopment work.
I guess, Mr. Chairman, we put some careful thought into this, and so this is not just something that I believe is arbitrary. I think we looked at a distribution pattern. I think perhaps one thing that can be clarified when we say public and third spaces, that doesn't necessarily mean all publicly owned. This is not necessarily all public parks, but that is part of development or redevelopment that would be usable by the public, or at least left undeveloped, and perhaps that can be clarified. Talk about third spaces by and large are privately owned, but that they're public gathering places.
And I think that's a very valid sort of concept. And I don't see anything wrong, though, with designating them here. And you know, it's not necessarily what form these spaces might take. They might be publicly owned, they might be privately owned, they might be a joint venture. I mean, it might be, you know, there are lots of different ways to keep these spaces usable by the public, okay? But it seems to me that it's useful and an important part of our planning process to look for those and try to identify those, if only to tell the world that, yeah, we think this would be a cool space to be used by this community. I don't see anything wrong with that.
Yeah, I love the idea. I'd like to see it done, but I won't support this if it's identifying specific spaces. I don't think we've gone through the due diligence. I don't think we've talked to private owners. I don't think it's the right thing to do right now. I think we can have general statements of where it should be. If there are public spaces that already exist, looks like you got some canal stuff and everything, that's great. If there's general language about it should be located and that we're gonna move forward with identifying spaces, I think that's great. But on this scale map, I can't tell you what these orange spaces are. And
So
I
do you
can't
think
tell
we
the
shouldn't have this map 24?
I think that if we're going to adopt that with this, we need to study every one of these orange spaces, know what they are, know what the
I agree.
what the ownership is, and go through the process you were talking about.
Yeah, well, we have.
You have, I have
Right,
not.
right.
And I'm fine with that, but I think it's more than just a tour, because we have to understand the ownership of it and whether or not that is a public open space, or if it's intended to be a private open space.
I think that can be determined through the development process. I don't know that we need to
Yeah,
choose that.
but Chuck, it is, because when somebody comes in to develop their property, you're gonna point at this and say, we've already identified on the comp plan, this should be an open space. So they're already at a disadvantage where we've declared we think their property should be open space. I don't think that's the fair thing to do. I think we should go through the process, determine it, and then go about that. I don't agree with that. I don't know, I mean, there's some large squares in here that look like they take up half blocks that I have no idea what that is. And I don't like putting it in a plan that says this is going to be a public space,
Yeah.
without knowing what it is.
I hear what you're saying, but on the other hand, you know, when are you going to go through that process? Because what we've traditionally done is not go through the process at all.
I'm more than willing to initiate it with you. We'll ask city council if we can do it, and we
Yeah.
can start it right away.
I mean, and again, I agree with you. We don't want to put people necessarily at a disadvantage or to have somebody jumping up and down saying we've made some regulatory taking. We don't want that. But at the same time, these spaces are very important. They're very important, particularly for people who live in these residential neighborhoods. Open space is a huge deal, and we don't have but so much of it in the city, you know? And so I think it's worthy of our time to really think about it and have some sort of vision for it.
Mr. Chair, if you don't mind, because I think the parties that have spoken have definitely given their opinions. I would definitely love to hear from the other three gentlemen where they sit on this. Again, I think all of us want to get to the same spot eventually, different routes to be taken. And are we the only three on the commission that feel this way?
I'm not sure I understand what you're asking, Steve.
I think you've heard, I mean, I share Mr. Hornig's opinion on how we should progress with this. I do feel it's important, and I was just curious, having listened to the discussions that Mr. Pates and Mr. Hornig have had, where do you fall in between somewhere, or is this something that's of value and we should be asking them to pursue?
So I'm gonna tell you, I guess I feel that there's a lot of debate right now, But at the same token, I do share, some of what staff has said about, what they've done as far as research. It sounds that we still have some questions. I believe that they can be answered. I'm not sure, at least for me, that it requires going back out for another drive. But at the same token, are we really looking for everything? Because we're not gonna get everything. So what really is the median that we're looking for here going forward? And like anything else, there's gonna be changes even going forward. So it could be a change next year, 3 years from now, 5 years from now. So I understand what I have. I can understand what they have for questions. And I think we can get this done, maybe by the 14th, but obviously there's a few things that need to be done.
Well, I will accept that maybe we can fine tune this language a little bit, because I don't think that all these orange spots would be literally public parks and required and maintained by the city. Do a better job highlighting what these areas currently are. Generally, almost all now are open to one extent or another. They don't contain structures. And we can highlight them a little bit more, talk about that these look like good options potentially for places to provide open space for the community, and say whether that's by public acquisition or by a development process to be determined.
To me, it looks like you've tried to identify what you've put in your language about contributing structures and the importance of third spaces with those structures. You tried to put those on this plan, and I agree with that. I commend it. And so when you look at the old hotel building and the area in front is a third space, I agree, that's a third space. I just think that when you put it in here and you show the orange lines, it has a different potential connotation to the next zoning administrator and the next planning director than it does to what you all may envision it as now. And that's my main concern, is it appears to be identifying specific spaces. Okay. And that's what I'm looking for, and I appreciate that. Okay, so we've really beat that up, sorry. So I guess at this point, do we feel that we will be able to move this along at our next meeting, or do we want to put the request, as Susanna had mentioned, to City Council to possibly give us more time to consider this? What is the...
Mr. Pace, you didn't seem comfortable that we'd be able to get this done by November 14th, did you? Because you said we should probably ask council for more time.
I think an additional 30 days would be plenty.
Okay.
Now, it's, okay. And I would support that. I mean, it's possible they may say no, but I doubt that. I would assume they would give us more time. So we'll find out on that.
We'll put it on their agenda for November 13th.
Okay. So do we need a motion to make that request? Okay.
Like a suggestion? All right, so someone could say that they move that the planning commission asks city council for additional time to make its recommendation on the Area 6 small area plan due to the complexity of the proposed amendment and the press of other business before the planning commission. The new due date would be, we'll say December 14th, which would be an additional 30 days from your November 14th.
I second it.
Okay, any further discussion? Okay, then are we voting? Cast vote? We on? Motion passes 6-0. Does that put that one to bed, or we need to make a, now that we've asked for more time, do we need to do anything to continue the discussion? We don't need to continue the public hearing, but the discussion itself.
Unless there's any other specific instructions that you want us to look at between now and November so that we can come back with as effective as a draft as
Mr. Chairman,
possible.
I would suggest that any of us who have additional comments or suggestions, send them along to staff as soon as possible. And when we come back for further discussion, if you could have a draft that shows the changes that have been made, that would be very
Is
helpful.
the different color helpful, like we did this time with the red? Is that helpful?
Anything like that, that would show the track changes or whatever.
Yeah, and I would like in the next meeting to have a discussion on the solutions part. I agree with a lot of those, but I also wanted to kind of go through some of those on page 184. Okay. So that takes us now to item number 6, general public comment. If anyone from the public wishes to speak before the Planning Commission, please come forward now. Okay, not seeing anyone, we'll close the public comment period. Next item of business is election of officers that's required every October, by our last meeting of October, for us to elect new officers. So I guess we'll,
How long, you've been chair for a whole year?
believe it or not.
Wow.
I know it's hard to tell because I'm not as in this chair as often as.
Yeah, recusal Chris. Well, I think we should nominate Renee to be our chairs.
I second that.
You want to be chair?
No.
Steve, you want to be chair? I don't want to be chair.
Did you actually make a motion?
No, I'm just trying to get it. Mr. Pate, you want to be chair again?
I don't care.
Well,
I think
you were vice, right? Yeah, okay. I'd like to nominate Mr. Gant to be our, to be our chairman for 2000, into 2018, into 2019.
I'd like to second that motion. Do I get to say here?
And I'm gonna support that motion.
You get to vote.
Do you have any comments on that? Do you have time issues or anything that would exclude you from serving in that capacity? Because I think you would be excellent.
So, I'm going to say yes.
Okay, you can't say probably, maybe. You can't say maybe.
I mean, because I think I've missed just as much as you have missed. And I already know I will not be here on the 14th.
Okay, well, we'll have to pick a vice chair
Okay,
as well.
all right.
Okay,
Okay.
so we have a motion and a second on Mr. Gant as our chairman for next year, or for starting the next meeting. Do we do a roll call, or? All right, we'll just take a vote.
We need to do the, we don't do the official.
Let's go ahead and
vote.
do the official vote.
Okay.
We doing the official vote? Is that what you want?
Yes, official vote.
Doing it anyway.
All
Push the
right.
button.
Push the button.
Okay, motion passes 6-0. Congratulations, Mr. Gant. How about vice chair? Do we have any?
I'd like to nominate seriously Mr. Rodriguez. I know he's not here, but
Someone will have to let him know that he better be at the next meeting.
I hope
Appears
he
he
will
will
be.
be,
Is there any
he will
indication
be
he would not
acting
be?
chairman at the next meeting.
Is there any indication he would not be at our next meeting?
Okay, then he'll be here. Okay.
I'd
So
still
I-
like to make the motion. He'd be,
Yeah, I think he'd be good. He's very involved in city things, so. I will second your motion for Mr. Rodriguez to be the vice chair.
Any
for
further
next year.
discussion? Okay, please cast your vote.
I'm going to remember the Ohio gang. I
should-
thought I was part of that gang.
Should we postpone this vote until he actually physically appears?
Nah, that would give him a chance to weasel out.
Should we go ahead and vote for an alternate in that regard, just in case he's not at the next meeting, given that Mr. Gant will be? But who would chair that meeting if the chairman wasn't here and the vice chairman wasn't here?
Secretary?
Can we appoint an acting person to chair the next meeting in case Mr. Rodriguez is not here?
Can I just nominate that
Yes,
pro tem?
you can. I think you are the chair as of right now, aren't you?
Mr. Gant, I'd be more than happy to hold
Thank
that
you,
spot
sir.
temporarily.
I was going to do that anyway. Yes,
We already did.
very did.
6-0.
he didn't vote for himself.
Mr. Slominski, please, sir, thank you.
Okay.
That'll teach you.
Do we have a
Don't miss a
secretary?
meeting.
I'd like to nominate Mr. Slominski for our secretary.
I second that.
Any further discussion?
No.
Please cast your votes. Somehow Mr. Beavers got away unscathed. I don't know how that happened.
Oh, don't worry.
Well,
I'm gonna
you know,
remember- I'm gonna
I told
remember
you,
Mr. Beavers, don't worry.
My
some special
term may be
committees.
up because, I don't know.
I will probably be attending by phone.
Okay. Anyone else?
No, I'll be here. I'll be here. I plan to be here. I do have a question, though. Will we have a meeting on November 28th or not? I mean, because we talked about maybe having a second meeting in November, which is very rare. And we would probably have to advertise that, because as a rule, we do not have a second meeting in November.
All right, let's go through the items we have on the November 14th agenda.
Okay.
At that point in time, whether we
That's fine with me. I just wanted to make a point of order so that we don't miss it in case,
Because we do, yes, we'll determine, let's
Let me ask a question. Is, as of this moment, Mr. Gant our new chairman? Okay, then I'm going to trade seats with you.
Seriously?
For the balance of this meeting.
Can't finish his actions?
Can play Hail to the Chief.
I make a lot of noise as I get
Can't
up and
believe,
walk away.
I can't believe you asked like that.
Can't hurry up and adjourn this thing, will you? Drop the mic, man.
No, I can't believe Chris did that, just like that. Okay, so the next item is the planning commissioner comments, and I guess that's me, to talk about housing. And what I want to tell you is that the RFP did go around. We all kind of put our comments in, and it was going forward. It's my understanding now that the city council has basically paused the action for housing while they look at some other regional aspects. So it's not to say that the RFP is not going to go forward, it's just deferred for right now. So that's where we are with the housing task force, affordable housing task force. Any questions? Okay. Next item is planning director comments, and it says Area 7 plans.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to express my appreciation to all of you that took the extra effort, and you all took the extra effort to be involved with the charrette a couple of weeks ago. We are continuing to work with the Street Sense folks, trying to achieve a greater fleshing out, if you will, of some of the ideas. They are promised that they will be giving us an updated draft of the market report very soon, that then staff will be reviewing and then commenting back to them. It is the city manager's policy that the city, particularly or specifically its staff, does not own a consultant's recommendations, or does not go public with the consultant's recommendations till the city staff is 100% comfortable with it. So we need to feel that we are speaking with one mind, and I don't think we're far apart. I don't think there are issues. I don't believe, but we are still working that through. We also are working through the whole discussion of transects and open space and transportation improvements that came forward. So staff is going back up to Bethesda, to the Street Sense offices on November 7th to try to work through these issues. Tentatively, we are scheduled a city council work session that the planning commission would be invited to at the council's November 26th meeting. Make sure I said that the right date. 98% I'm certain. November 27th, Diddy, I knew I had it wrong. At the council's November 27th meeting, we'll confirm that, assuming we stay on the schedule that we have. So tentatively, the market report will be discussed on November 27th. We, of course, would need to release it in advance of that before Thanksgiving, so folks do have a chance to read it through. We've been talking about a tentative draft discussion with council and planning commission, December 11th, December 12th range. I'm wondering if that might be premature or maybe pushing the issue too quickly. We want to get it right, so that will either be early December or might end up being in January. I think there were a lot of good comments. I've had a lot of positive comments from all the folks that were interviewed, that they felt like they were able to kind of get their ideas out there. So if any of you have any comments about the process or about the content, share them with me either now or later. I'm glad to hear. The charrette's a new experience for just about everybody in the room who went there, and so we've all learned from it, and the contract with Street Sense does indicate that our next planning process, which would be with Central Park / Celebrate the whole Area 1 west of 95, would have its charrette process also. Other planning areas would not have a charrette. They would be more public hearing, public neighborhood comment kind of sessions, as we did for areas 3 and 6. So we do anticipate another charrette, and we want to learn from this one, and if anyone has any thoughts about it one way or the other, let us know.
One of the things I was wondering about is, I don't know, who among us attended the Friday night wrap-up?
That's a very good question, because none of you did.
Yes, and that's why I was wondering whether it might make sense for Street Sense to come and give us one.
I think that I do not believe that their ideas gelled as much as I hoped that they would at that point in the process. I do think there needs to be a follow-up discussion with the Planning Commission. I was kind of surprised, based on the discussions we had, that Friday evening was not more specific. Mm-hmm. They seemed to become more tentative the closer we got to the Friday night session. And I'm not completely sure exactly what that means, and that's going to be part of our discussion on the 7th to see. I don't want them to feel like we're putting words in their mouth, and we don't want them to put words in our mouth. So I think we still have a little bit of a dance to kind of go through.
Well, what I was getting at is, I mean, I'm not feel that there's a great need for that summary. What I would like to see, though, is a conversation between Street Sense and the Planning Commission before too much longer.
We'll discuss that on the 7th with them and see how we want to move forward with that. I mean, I hear what you're saying. I do understand.
Is that about specific areas that you want to look at, or what's the nature of that? Because I think in this point, they've gathered the info. We expect them to come back with some type of a rough concept for initial consideration. To me, that's kind of the key part where I want to be involved as a planning commissioner. I felt that after attending, the charrette, the work session, and then the follow-up that I had the following day, that the Friday night stuff was going to be kind of, here's everything we learned from this week-long effort. And I kind of already had a pretty good feel of what that was after those 3 meetings that we had prior to that, that I had prior to that.
Well, what I was thinking about is where they would be trying out some of their ideas on us. That's essentially what I was looking for.
Well, Mr. Pates, as this evolves, it's not going to be their ideas. It's going to be our city staff and Street Sense's ideas. So I totally get trying them out on you, but it's not them trying it on. I think it's going to be us trying the ideas out on you.
Well, I'm all I'm after is for us to be more involved than we were in the past.
Sure.
In formulating those ideas.
Sure.
Maybe it could be a 3-way.
And that might be, As I said, I'm hesitant to talk about a draft plan at council in early December, but I think it does make some sense to have some draft concepts to be presented to the planning commission, not to council, on the 12th, in advance of us going
Maybe
back to
so.
council, to sort of,
That sounds
sort of
good.
put these things out there and see what sticks.
Good, good. Thank you.
Anything else, sir?
I think we only have one public hearing item scheduled for the 14th, the Mary Washington signs, and what's the other one? Well, I meant in terms of the development application, but so Mary Washington has now come back with their plan for a fairly meaty square pillar with their signs attached to them that I personally can say, I think they've listened to everyone's comments. We'll see what you all think when you actually see it, and we're happy to share the design to you, but it's pretty restrained, I guess, in my opinion, compared to some of the ideas they had before. So hopefully you all will, I think they're moving in the right direction. And it's just one substantial brick pillar with signs on either side of it that would be in the
I'm going to ask the
northwest
question.
corner of the Route 1 Mary Washington Boulevard intersection. And then the other would be the public hearing comments on the form-based code for Area 3.
Okay. Chuck, what's going on with the, if you know, the VA clinic? I haven't heard anything in quite a while.
You and me both.
Okay, well,
Apparently, the
that's-
VA folks are still trying to get their collective act together to actually release the RFP. We, the
Oh.
city, are moving forward with trying to obtain VDOT funds for the construction of Gateway Boulevard to the tune of $23 million, I think it is, in the low 20s. So we are moving forward with what we would need to do to make Gateway Boulevard happen. If the VA clinic evaporates and doesn't happen, City Council's goal is still for that 100 acres to be developed into some sort of employment center of some sort, and a road access would be necessary. So we're pursuing that.
Thank you.
Mr. Johnston, do you have any comments on your lawsuit?
No, sir.
Well, you know, I noticed they put into the planning commission went 5-1, and I knew who the one was. You know, so you guys are all the trouble, not me.
I believe that item's going back to council on November 27th, I believe.
Tried.
All right, anything else? So I just want to thank Ms. Finn and Mr. Craig again for driving us all around. And the highlight of my trip with Mr. Pates today was Mr. Pates pointing out violations and telling them to take pictures of it. You know, take a picture of that.
Well, our highlight when we went was driving by Mr. Pates' house and seeing him sitting on his front porch. We got that one.
All right, if there are no other comments, that concludes this
That was
evening.
my
Thank you.
break time. I was working.
Yeah, we saw you had